Australian Curriculum Studies Association would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and the waterways from where we are all meeting today. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. We value the contributions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to education and their continued support of the teaching and learning of all Australians. We recognise that for thousands of years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been the first teachers, and that we are committed to continue our learning alongside them. Welcome back to ACSA Insights. Thank you very much for joining us here again today. Now, this week is a very important week for all Australians because it is Reconciliation Week. Now, beginning on the 27th of May, it acknowledges the landmark of the referendum in 1967, where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders were included in the national census. It ends on the 3rd of June, another significant date, for in 1992, it was the Mabo decision, where Eddie Mabo challenged terra nullius, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders were acknowledged as the traditional owners and the custodians of the lands in which we meet. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Simon Thompson to our show today. Simon is a Gidja man, born and raised, but he's on Wajik Noongar Budget here today. He has had a diverse career, beginning as a news editor in Perth and Sydney before transitioning to public education as a classroom teacher, and was known for the Follow the Dream coordinator role he held in Port Hedland in Western Australia. Now today, he's actually the programme manager for many of the Follow the Dream programmes with the Polly Farmer Foundation all across Australia, leveraging his understanding of the education system, of community and corporate stakeholder engagement to champion for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks, Anna. Great to be with you.
Hopefully quite an easy one to start with, because this is quite one which I really love listening to guests about, because it gives us a real sense of that connection. But, just tell us about yourself and really your identity as an Aboriginal man.
Yeah, well, that's the easy one, is it? Okay. For me, it depends on the day of the week, but It's definitely been a journey growing up. And I think it's helpful to kind of talk about my ancestry here and the journey that I've been on so far. So on my dad's side, he's a Gidja man from the East Kimberley. He lives in Wyndham. That's where the family settled after our grandma was taken from a station in Maple Downs in the East Kimberley. And so all the families kind of settled in Wyndham and stayed there for a while. So she was, that was grandma who was born on a station. And then her great grandmother was, no one knows what her birthday. So her country is just in the East Kimberley as well. So, and she was on that station. And I haven't had that much of a connection with that family until, really recently. So there's been a lot of disconnection. And going back and having kids and then thinking, how am I going to, continue this identity and talk to them about it? I really felt it was really important to get back and connected with that side of the family. And it's been a really fantastic journey being welcomed. I mean, that's the main thing. I thought, well, I've been sort of disconnected. So what's going to happen when I go back? And I knew who my dad was. I knew him growing up, but just didn't have that connection. So that's one side of the family. Then on the mum's side, they're a farming family from the wheat belt. It was just an amazing upbringing for me, having that side of the family. That they're not knowing the other side of the family made it sort of really important for me to understand. One of the things that came up for me recently was during the Voice debate, when I think Jacinta Price was talking about convicts and Aboriginal people and how there's a bit of a correlation there. Because my mum's side of the family does have a convict heritage, so that was really struck a point for me. So I really dived deep into that and just thought, what is the difference? That didn't seem right. That seems like a bit of a false equivalence. And I think one of the main reasons that I found from that was how once you're a convict, you came to Australia as a convict and you had skills, you were no longer a convict. You could make a life for yourself. And then the other part was, as a convict, if you're the son or daughter of a convict, you're no longer a convict.
I get you. Yeah.
That sort of thing. So it was really important for me to go connect with that side of the family. And I was just amazed by how welcoming, and there were no questions or that sort of thing. Whereas, and almost like I had to say with my friendship group in in Perth, it was almost like I had to come out as Aboriginal.
Yes.
It's not obvious. Like, I know it's not
No.
obvious that I'm Aboriginal based on, I'm not quite light skinned.
Yeah.
But then going back up and connecting with family, there's no question. It's like, no, you are Aboriginal. You're one of us. So that's the really interesting part of it, where skin color doesn't really have that much to do with it. Although I understand the journey is that I understand that I'm kind of treated a bit differently, and I need to tell people I'm Aboriginal, which is also the interesting part.
Really challenging. And I think I listened to someone the other day about that, and this idea of walking in two worlds. And the person was very adamant that it shouldn't have to be two worlds. Like, that was the whole point, because so many Aboriginal people have got this heritage, and it's kind of like you're sort of polarizing that these two worlds are separate, as opposed to really connecting with both elements and being that. Interesting to know, obviously, when you went, I know from just understanding from other people that being on country, and I think there's been a lot of conversation in the media at the moment about what country means, especially with the local, with election time, and it was all quite controversial about what does the country mean. For you, going back onto your country, how was that experience, considering you didn't grow up on country?
Well, I mean, Wyndham isn't necessarily country for Gidja people, but I have been to the Argyle Diamond Mine for work, and I have heard other people talk about what it's like to be on country, and I can only imagine what it's like to be on your country. And it's really difficult to kind of break apart the two. But what I think of when I think of country, I think of your ancestors have been living and surviving and thriving and educating each other for tens of thousands of years on that country. They've gone from waterhole to waterhole. They've observed the animals. They've observed the weather patterns and the plants, and just can read it like a book, which is kind of like what my dad does when we're out and about. We go out and about, and we'll be talking, and then he goes, "Oh, hang on, that's a curlew. What's a curlew doing out right now? I shouldn't be doing that." Kind of like understanding the throes of nature and where everything should be in its own place. So the idea that your ancestors can be traced back that far on this particular piece of land is just kind of thrilling to know that they've been there and you're walking in their footsteps. And even that, just to think about their like they're there, like the ancestors, the old people, which old people for Aboriginal people is your ancestors. The old people are kind of there still, they're part of nature, basically. Think about, the burials that happened, and maybe, everyone's there. The DNA is in the land and in the animals and plants, sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think that's a very beautiful way with understanding that culture, that really the land and yourself are intertwined because you have, and it's not, that word connection doesn't really do it justice, because it's so deep, isn't it? And it runs so deep, that kind of connection. Yeah. Now, if we think about this year, because I know Reconciliation Week, we have different themes each year, and I quite like this one because it was talking about how we bridge now to next, which we've sort of briefly touched on already, but I suppose it explains how we understand the past, the present, and the future. We talk about that, which is often a bit tricky when we think of Aboriginal, because it just seems this beautiful continuum, which I know you're quite passionate about. But so we know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are the longest living culture on the earth. What can we learn from the past to help take us into the future?
I think some of the things that I talk about with Aboriginal people and my family, sort of like that connection to nature, and how if we've gone from, there was I think Sapiens, the book Sapiens talks about, there was a point in the past where we were all hunter-gatherers, and then it came a point where there was, the resources on the land for some people to start farming, the agricultural revolution. And then it moved into the Industrial Revolution. And every step along the way, it's kind of taken us away from that reliance on nature and the connection to nature. Like, you have to understand everything about what's happening in your neck of the woods in order to survive, and then to pass that knowledge on. So it's about that observation, which I'm just, every time I'm out with an elder or in the presence of an elder, and just their knowledge of what's around them. And also my dad as well, who just observes and just understands nature so well, is so important. And I feel like a lot of people, especially in Perth, they talk about the favorite place in the world is the beach or the bush, and that's just, you're just so surrounded by nature, and it just makes you feel alive. Because, as I said, like going through the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution to now, that's a short period of time. When you think about human existence, and we're kind of not geared for this technology that's around us, even though it's, makes our lives easier.
Yeah.
But we're just not geared to be around it constantly. We need to be out there. So that's one point that I think we could learn from. Also, sustainability. I know Dr. Richard Wally has often spoken about sustainability being an Aboriginal kind of understanding, and then people in our Western society are slowly coming back to sustainability as something important.
Yes.
So there are definitely rules and stories that talk about what animals you can eat at certain times and how much you should take and who you're going to give that to, in your family or extended family, that sort of thing. So I think sustainability and connection to nature is really important things we can actually take forward.
Yeah, I love the way you beautifully summed that up, in the sense that it's that nature of slowing down and recognizing this length of time, that period of time. And you mentioned that Industrial Revolution, and I was recently talking about education, in that sense that we saw this growth, and Sir Ken Robinson talked about this explosion in education, how things changed. And as you've alluded to, AI and tech is pushing that trajectory even higher. But realistically, that time frame is so small compared to what we've learned from Aboriginal culture. And it seems, we talk about very instantaneous present and what's happening in the really immediate future, as opposed to looking at the long game, really, and looking at how have we developed our education system. Now, it has been a really tough year for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. I think the results of The Voice, and especially the recent disruptions we saw at Anzac Day services this year, show that reconciliation is as important as ever. As a father, as an educator, how do you think we can support young people today to understand such events and navigate through them?
I think it's important to understand that these struggles aren't a new thing. They've been a constant thing, and I'm assuming they will be constant as well. I just remembered I watched this a documentary from 1988 recently called Australia Days, which talks about it's 24 hours in Australia Day on multiple locations. And I think they were celebrating 200 years, the centenary of our federation, or the bicentennial celebrations. Yeah. And even then there was a young Linda Burney talking the same things that she talks about now. Yeah. The same conversation was happening back then. And there was about 40,000 people protesting those celebrations. So there's been struggle all the way through. And you think about those, and then the Pilbara strike, and all the way through, there's been things happening. So one thing, I do talk to students about this quite a bit. We have elders who have brought us up this far. They've done the hard yards, but that doesn't mean that we stop now. We're not quite there yet, and it's going to rely on the young people of this generation to keep pushing forward, so that there is this equalization, I suppose. And also, I guess what we really need to get a handle on is that there are past things that have happened in the past that affect the future. Bad things have happened, good things have happened. They all affect the future. We can't just sort of say, no, let's just forget what happened and get on with it, because there's still healing to be done.
Huge. Yeah. I think that was what you mentioned when you're talking about your own heritage. It's only one step away from the stolen generation. Like, it's that close to what it was. We still look at that, and the current issues that we still face today with Aboriginal children being removed at a greater rate, in different ways. So we're still experiencing so many things that need to move on forward. And I think even just being a mum of a non-Indigenous child, when you look at some of the big things that have been in the last few years, what children have faced, seeing other young children, even like when we saw the George Floyd issue in the US come over, but it was very in our face of what was actually holding a mirror up to what was happening in our Aboriginal culture. So it is, and we talk about reconciliation. I think it is that importance that everybody is aware that we're all on that journey together. I think that's really interesting. And I think it is, young people need to be aware of what's happening and understand it, and know that they've got to actively help to change it for the future if we're going to see any differences now.
Yeah, and you're right. It's not that long ago. Yeah.
No, it always baffles me that, you will probably, I think what made it realistic too is when we looked at some of the Anzac today, that they talked about people who had been in World War II and it wasn't anymore, like that kind of distance. And you think, oh, well, it was like 100 years plus. But then I think there's so many people who are still the stolen generation, who are still part of that. And that wasn't that long ago. They're still so relevant, and who are still, experiencing the trauma of that, I guess.
Yeah, and if you think about, say, booing an Anzac Day service and that sort of thing, and booing a welcome, sort of like we're trying to bring these Aboriginal kids up to have pride in themselves and get excited about their heritage and say that, there's a world out there that's ready for you to contribute, and then they kind of cop that. So that's a bit disheartening. But I guess also there are people who want to change things and make the world better, and there are people who want to keep things the way they are and maintain the systems that we have. So if we believe that the systems aren't working for everyone, then we need to challenge those, and that's what we're trying to create for our kids.
Very much so, definitely. Now, if we look forward to the future, so we've briefly touched on this already, where do you hope we'll be in terms of what actions do we need to take to ensure that reconciliation remains at the forefront for all of us here in Australia?
I think one of the keys for me is I'd really love for mainstream Australia to get really excited about being part of this. This is part of their story as well, the story of Australia. If you love Australia so much, you need to look beyond the last 230 odd years. There's so much to get excited about. The understanding of Aboriginal people have, and also like the invitation that I see Aboriginal people making. They consistently invite people to come along with them, to understand their neck of the woods, their culture, their histories. And that's just a really exciting invitation to take up. If you've ever had that conversation or gone out on country with people who know their way around, like Aboriginal people do. So I suppose that's part of it. That for me is the key. There's a lot to get excited about. We have a long history, and there's just so much to learn about this country that we all live on and love.
And I think that's always such a lovely thing about reconciliation, that Aboriginal people still seek to make that, in terms of they're still willing to have reconciliation, and it's not about anything else. And I think that's such an honourable thing about Aboriginal culture, is that is how they view it. It's not a case of being angry or getting in that space, because they know they're actually still willing to open their arms and say, come learn, we're here. Despite the backlash we often get, we're here to teach you and to learn from it. So, and I think that's lovely, because I think the more you engage in that as a non-Aboriginal person, the benefits you have to understanding how Australia looks as well. And just, I think it's a beautiful place to be, as you're saying, you're alluding to it. It's an amazing place. But understanding Australia at a deeper level is pretty important for everyone,
Yeah. I suppose if you are a part of a welcome to country and you feel like that's an insult to you because you're in your own country, I'd like to know how are you going to welcome everyone to country then? It's sort of like an invitation to be welcome to this part of the world which Aboriginal people understand and know so well and have deep connections to and have stories to tell about. So if you're someone who doesn't want to be welcomed that way, well, I like to know, could you welcome us to your country then, if this is your country? And what stories would you tell?
Exactly.
What do we need to know? How long have you been here? What areas are important to you? That sort of thing. So I never had that. If anyone says that they don't want to be welcome to our own country, I'd like to know, well, can you stand up in front of everyone and welcome us then, please? Because this is important to you.
Yes. And I think that comes down to, we mentioned at the very start of the podcast about identity, isn't it? And I think there's that real understanding that Aboriginal people have a strong identity. They know who they are. It's not, yes, as you were sort of talking about, going on the journey of understanding it, but you're strong in your knowledge of who you are and what the values are and what's being brought to you. Even that when you're talking about, going out in country and understanding your ancestors walk those pathways, that's really, it's just really deep, I think really kind of impactful, because you're going, wow, that's what you're connecting to. Whereas I think that in a lot of cases, people, the ones who are maybe making some of those loud voices, don't have that connection or identity to who they are, to what they're looking at. And so it's easier to maybe fan that off. Now, I recently watched a video by a very eminent professor here in Perth, Professor Braden Hill, on really about non-Indigenous people being allies and kind of what could they do to be allies? Because let's face it, there's so many people who really want to be in that space and they want to be an ally. It's often just they don't know how to be. What do you see as the attributes and actions of a good ally for an Aboriginal person?
Yeah, Professor Braden Hill's always on point. So
Yeah.
I leaned on him a lot during the Voice campaign, seeing all his
Yeah.
responses, which was fantastic. So
Mm.
what more could you add to that? I mean, I think the most important thing about being an ally is to not center your own experience. That's part of it. And also to make mistakes, like be okay to make mistakes and to get growled at by Aboriginal people and not get defensive.
Yes.
I think it's almost like a bit of a just you're part of the group if you get growled at by an Aboriginal person, you know, and you don't and that you can maintain that relationship. So I think it's just really having that understanding of the experience is different for Aboriginal people. It's a different experience. And I also talk about how I'm kind of like an undercover blackfella because I can actually, go in two worlds.
Yeah.
And I need to tell people, I'm actually Aboriginal if that happens. So I can understand both worlds. And if I've got that privilege, right, of being able to just, be quiet and not say anything. Whereas there are some people who may look different to me, don't have that privilege. So I've got to remind myself that I've got to be an ally too. I can't be undercover and sliding by and just nothing to see here, that sort of thing. And also checking in, but not to make it your own feel good sort of story. It's really not about not centering your own experience and centering the experience of others.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I think when you see and especially in the education sector, where Aboriginal people have such a heavy cultural load in that they're trying to be a teacher or an Aboriginal officer, but they're also being asked so much for their kind of their knowledge, their expertise, and asked to do so much more to support, Aboriginal children in the school. And I remember a wonderful AIO I had who said, it doesn't stop at 3:30 for us because we go home and it's still community and we're still teaching, we're still out there. And so this kind of knowledge that we switch on and off is so different. So it's actually, it's a hard job because you are also with your community in terms of in a different world where the kind of, I suppose, the understanding that you would have in your culture is then having to be transferred, and we talk about this whole need for code switching, but it's really tricky, that one. So it must be really difficult when you're trying to in a system that's also bridging the culture. And that cultural load is massive.
It is. And systems are really good at switching things off and on and breaking things down and saying, oh, well, this is, oh my goodness, we need Aboriginal stuff here. And then we can say, no, we don't need that anymore. We got to work on something else, So you're right. It this never goes away for Aboriginal people. It's we're always thinking about it. People are always thinking out in the community about it as well. So it's something you can't switch off. You're right.
No, completely. Now, this is something I really had a big think about recently, that the value of you being the longest living culture on Earth is massive. It's really huge to actually get your head around. But then in that sort of context, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are the very first teachers here, which is actually mind-blowing in the sense that the teaching and learning has been around for such a long period of time. Now, teaching and learning is a real central part of your culture. What can we learn from culture that will best serve us as educators?
I think just thinking about Aboriginal culture, I often see a deep respect for elders and old people because they were the lifelines. They were the people that had the knowledge, how to live, how to live the right way and how to survive. And just thinking about, say, 50 or 60,000 years of continuous culture, what does that actually take to continue for that long? Like, what are the attributes you need? It's really difficult to actually visualize this. So I run a separate workshop where I've got a rope I've seen, Dr. Simon Forrest came up with this idea of this rope, a timeline, 5-meter rope, which represents 50,000 years. And each century is, I think, a centimeter. And just thinking about the things that have happened along that time. And then it gets to colonization, which is a couple of centimeters at the end. So not having, having an oral language as well, and need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to memorize things and continually telling stories and singing songs and passing on knowledge like that. So I think that deep respect for elders is really important. And I think now we outsource. We have to outsource our education.
Yes.
We can't like do that for our kids.
No.
But that was just how to survive. Like you needed that relationship and community to survive for that long.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that workshop, I'd also say, you know, are we going to get to another? How long is this the way we're living now? How long is that going to go for? Is that going to go for 10,000 years, let alone 50,000 years? And what would it take for us to survive that long with this continuous culture? So I think just that respect for old people as being, you know, they've got that knowledge and understanding and that deep respect for them and what they can bring to a community is something that we could all learn from.
Definitely. Because this was interesting, you know, we talk about knowledge and understanding, especially in this kind of curriculum-based language that we use in education. But I think the way you've summed up as well is that kind of the methodology or the kind of the way in which teaching and learning occurs in culture is something that I think we probably would benefit a lot from, because we see initiatives in education, which is kind of the knowledge and understanding part of what can we learn from Aboriginal people to understand this concept, or let's learn about this, you know, let's have a look at the first astronomers or whatever it would be. But it's very content based, whereas the way in which we learn, and it's a tricky one because Aboriginal children are, you know, unfortunately product of so much research, you know, and they're over researched by thing, and it's talked about how Aboriginal children learn as opposed to how would all children learn from a methodology that is used. And you alluded to that with the storytelling and that kind of thing. I think that would be a powerful way in which we look at Aboriginal education.
Yeah, and when I started teaching, a lot of my mentors were speaking about relationships, like relationships being so important, and I didn't really understand what that actually meant.
Yeah.
Until I went away and worked, you know, in Broome and the Pilbara and that sort of thing. Yeah. Because if you work in the city, where I did work in the city for a while, it's almost like the students just understand that there's this structure, there's you're the leader, you're the authority, and they need to learn from you. You know, that's basically what I got from the city. And then out in the country and maybe other areas, that doesn't matter. Like that structural authority doesn't mean anything. In fact, that's probably a threat more than anything.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm stuck in this room with this person who can, you know, get me suspended or get me in trouble or growl at me, and I got to stay, that sort of thing. So, and building relationships really isn't. I mean, teachers have it pretty tough because you don't have a lot of time to build a relationship. No. You can probably do maybe one or two PowerPoints, show some pictures of, you know, your dog and your kids and that sort of thing. Yeah. And then ask them how they went at footy practice or footy training.
Yeah.
But I saw, say in Headland, there were teachers who were part of, you know, the footy club. They'd see them after school at training. They'd see them after school at Follow the Dream, and they'd build that trust where they understood the students understood that they were actually there for them and to make their education and to make them better as kids and learn about them.
Yeah.
As well. I mean, I had so many times where I had students, you know, out of class and saying, I don't want to go back in that class because that teacher doesn't like me.
Yeah.
Yeah. The teacher might love them, but just the system doesn't connect because of that system. So I think the best thing I ever did was invite parents and families in at the start of term. I had the luxury, of course, to have that time to invite parents in as a Follow the Dream coordinator. And the students could see me interact with their nan or their pop or their carer, and you know, I'd have some space for their kids or their younger toddler brothers and sisters to muck around in and give them, you know, something to do. And that was the best thing I ever did because all of a sudden you're as a teacher and educator, you are real to them because they can see you with people they care about, treating them with respect, not just sending them texts and messages or emails and that sort of thing, but really building that deep relationship. And that's what I learned from being out in the Pilbara and the Kimberley.
And I think that links very nicely into what we were talking about before with the stolen generation. Like, it's the art, you know, I think we have to be so conscious of the fact that for so many Aboriginal people, sending your kid to school is not an easy decision because they're so fearful from their own experiences of school. And also if they're not seen, I suppose if you can't see yourself reflected in a school as well, it's really, really difficult. And you're carrying so much of that understanding of what school life was before. So that is so important, as you're saying, that connection with the whole family and building that trust. And I think I remember a group of people going on a cultural awareness course, which I do think are just fabulous things for everybody to do in whatever context they're in, about working with small children out in community and how they ask 100 questions. Who's your mum? Who's your sister? Have you got this? And not seeing that as offensive and I'm giving all my personal information away, but that is how they're understanding your structure and what you mean to everybody else and where you fit. And I thought that was so beautiful because I think that could happen in all aspects of education, not just with Aboriginal children. I think it's really important that we are human and not a difference of I'm the teacher, you're the child, I'll fill you with information. It's actually, what am I learning from you as well in that context?
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you value? Like what do the students actually want? What do the parents actually want for their kids as well?
Yeah.
How to make that real.
Yeah, definitely. Now, it's been a great conversation and it goes so quick, but I always love this last question because I think everybody has one of these in their life, often more than one. But has there been a teacher, has there been someone in your life who's inspired you on your educational journey so far?
Oh, there have been so many.
I love this one, yeah.
I think when you said that, it made me really think of the AIEOs in schools that I've worked in. Have such an amazing grasp of the community, have such deep connections, because like we just said before, like this is their life actually. It's not just something they rock up to and then forget about. Just some of the conversations I've had, which actually so many aha moments when talking about, say, a student's behaviour or what's their life like outside. But there've been so many. There's one in particular, Daniela from Govos, which I worked with before, who just had such an amazing grasp of the job. And she's actually a mother of 9 daughters, who she put them all through high school and actually had a TV show about it on NOC.
Oh, wow. I do think
House
I might
Rules.
Yes. Okay. I might have seen bits of it. Yep.
So that's that. She just, all the parents and community just loved her, and she was really, she wanted to bring community into the school and make that a safe place for community. And some of the things that she told me about, the kids and my own identity as well, which was just really, really amazing. So I think anyone I think as a teacher who makes me hopeful about the future, I think that's some of the greatest teachers can do that as well. I've got a particular mentor of mine, Mike Dyson, who does a lot of work with boys and making just encouraging people to have deeper conversations. This creates, it's such a great environment and makes people want to go out there and change the world, sort of thing. So there's a couple of people who really stick in my mind when I think about great teachers. But then also thinking about my dad as well, who teaches in that old way where it's just and just understanding, this deep understanding for the environment and animals, and just the old stories he'd tell of the old people, and throughout his life and that sort of thing. I think it's just like such a font of knowledge. You just wish you could bottle it all. Every time I talk to him, I was like, I wish I just recorded that. Pretty amazing stuff out there.
I think what you're saying there is just beautiful in the sense of just listening, that kind of and I've been very lucky. I've worked alongside you before, and just seeing you in action, I'll give you credit for that just you going into spaces where people around you feel so calm because you are so open to listening, and and I think you've got a great way of self-reflecting and doing that, which is actually, I think,
thank you,
for a lot of people, is such a skill they have to learn, whereas you've got that sort of, just seems to naturally come out of you, that you listen and you self-reflect and you do that. So I'm very lucky that I've had the opportunity to connect with you for many years, Simon. So I just hope there's more people who come along and on that journey with you, and learn more from you, because I think that you are just gold, and
Thank you so
wonderful
much.
journey for me, definitely. So I will definitely sort of talk a bit more about your next journey that you're going on. I think that's quite an interesting one, isn't it? You're going into that space. I don't know if you want to mention your new venture, which would be quite exciting for
Yeah,
people.
yeah, definitely. Just starting up. So I've got a business called Jarek, which is
Yeah.
I don't really know how to explain it. I think I need to come up with a pitch for it, but it's
Yeah.
based on this Mike Dyson's
Yeah.
program design, where it's more about connection than anything. It's really small groups, 10 to 15
Yeah.
people in the group. It really came about during the voice debate. I was really wanted to get out there and kind of disprove all these narratives and just say, well, hang on, this is actually not the right thing, kind of like the convict thing.
Yes.
But I did so much research, and then I was just like so overwhelmed by the almost like flooding the zone that was happening that I didn't get anything done, and I felt really bad about it. I didn't actually do any posts. I just ended up
Yes.
fighting people on Facebook.
Yeah.
But then I think what happened was there was this someone did a post. There was West Coast Eagles saying they'd done a smoking ceremony to start the year. And then someone on there said, "Oh, I've had enough of smoking ceremonies. Have been shoving down our throats all this stuff going on." And so I did a really I thought it was a nice, thoughtful, curious kind of post saying, "Oh, that's interesting. You feel that way about that welcome to country or smoking ceremony." I find them really nourishing and spiritual things to go to, and I always learn something new from it. Whoever's doing it, I wonder how often you get exposed to this. And then I didn't get one comment or one like. It was like there was no interaction whatsoever. So that kind of made me think, maybe Facebook isn't the arena for me, and maybe just asking people to come to this small group and connect with each other and have an understanding of my identity and then your identity, and talk about what the next step could be. And every time I do it, there's amazing contributions from the people. And they actually, the last time I did it, everyone kind of left and said, "Oh, I feel like we're like best buddies. We've only done this for 2 hours." But the way that we can connect and actually think about our own identity and compare that to my story of my identity, and then think about who are you going to go out and get away from this feeling of shame and guilt over our collective past, and get through that, and then move on to what we're going to do next. And I think that's what it's all about, just connecting more authentically with everybody, and then how you can connect with others to then lead by example and then move on our reconciliation journey.
The cultural conversations are, I think, what people are actually seeking and craving. And you're a perfect conduit.
People are interested in it. Yeah, people are actually curious. They don't know where to go or what to do. There's books out there,
Yes, exactly.
Maybe that's the thing. Yeah. You can rely on books.
And I think it's such a privilege to be in that space around Aboriginal people, and that safe space that you create for us to step into, I think is pretty magical, and we're very, very lucky. So thank you, Simon, for that. It has been the most wonderful time just to have a talk to you and understand from different viewpoints, and a lot of people I think will benefit from this, and I do hope they reach out to you and look at what the amazing work that you're doing, and also at a level just reach out to those around them in their area or the country they're on. I think that's really important. So for our listeners, I'm sure you've had a lovely time with us today, and we will put into chats all kind of the stuff that Simon's doing, but also things that might be happening in your local area. But for now, thank you, and I wish you all a wonderful day.